Hey, Johnny here, and on this build I'm pushing myself out of my comfort zone to tackle my most difficult project to date. And just when I thought I was almost done building, I decided good just isn't good enough. I can't believe this is happening again. What you say? So if you recall, about 4 or 5 months ago, I built a record cabinet with a 3D carved Tambour door. And with almost 1 million views on YouTube and 111 million views on Instagram Reels, I knew I wanted to build another similar cabinet, but take it to a whole new level. And that first Tambour cabinet is one of my favorite pieces I've ever built for myself. I mean, it serves as my record cabinet. I use it almost every single day. So since that build, I've been thinking about what I can do to top that project. And y'all, I truly think that I've done so, but ultimately, I want you to be the judge. I'll get into all the design and inspiration details here in a bit, but first up, I need to mill up this rough walnut. Now, this is the same air-dried, locally sourced Oklahoma black walnut that I used on Katie's buffet cabinet. And being air-dried, that wood was exceptionally beautiful with all the different color variations that you just don't get from the kiln-dried dimensional lumber that I get from my local hardwood dealer. I buy this stuff from my friend and local sawyer, Zach Wicks, and after burning through my last stash, I hit him up and bought 12 more walnut slabs, as well as some dimensional lumber that he had milled and air dried. Now, there is a ton of prep work to be done before I really even start building, and most of that is just gluing up the panels that I need. This cabinet requires 12 separate panels, and these first panels are for the Tambour doors themselves. I made these from those dimensional boards that I got from Zach and made sure to have matching continuous grain across the face of the cabinet. The remainder of the panels I need to glue up will be made from the slabs. Now, all of these are 5/4 inches thick, which is the American system of denoting wood thickness, and each quarter equals 1/4 of an inch. But for all you metric users out there, that's 31.75 millimeters, which I guess is somehow more accurate or easy. Actually, confession time. I use metric all the time. I even have a metric tape measure, and on certain operations, it just makes more sense, especially when you're designing something and you get some weird dimension like 11 inches and 13/64. Now, in those situations, I almost always convert to metric because it's just easier to read. But for all you Freedom Unit haters out there leaving comments telling me how much easier metric is, please understand, I hear you, I see you, and I don't care. For one thing, Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution says our Congress has the power to set the standard of weights and measurements, not Johnny Builds, unfortunately. So I have nothing to do with the USA using imperial, along with 2 other global superpowers, Liberia and Myanmar. And, you know, when I'm making any big decision, I think, what would Liberia and Myanmar do? And second, I wasn't quite alive yet back in 1790 when our nation's founders adopted the English imperial system versus the newer French metric system. So I'm just playing in the sandbox that I was given. A sandbox that measures roughly 14 hooves by 17 cattails. I mean, I don't understand why the rest of the world is confused by our system of weights and measures. Okay, back to the build, and one thing I think becomes very clear very early on in this project is I went into this without a fully formed idea. And this led to some serious issues and some late design choices that added a few extra weeks to the build. Yes, you heard that right. I said added weeks to the build. And normally that's just how I work, part of my wing it philosophy. And the idea is I begin the build with the larger design figured out, but then I work through all the smaller details as they arise. And 99% of the time, this serves me really well. I mean, I like not being locked into a design and having the ability to change on the fly when inspiration hits me. However, this build, I would have been much better off just taking an extra week at the top just to work out all the design details and the order of operations of how this was all going to come together. But hey, hindsight is 20/20, and I literally wear bifocals. And I guess this is a good time to go ahead and dive into that design. Now, I like to try my hand at different design styles. I've done everything from Art Deco, lots of mid-century modern, all the way up to contemporary. But the thing that's been catching my eye lately has been vintage Victorian furniture. Now, Victorian furniture originates under the reign of British Queen Victoria in the year 1837. Victorian furniture features intricate carvings and shapes, extremely dark wood, and is often considered very lavish. And here's a couple examples because I feel like I'm not doing a very good job explaining it. And I will caveat all of this by stating this piece of furniture I'm trying to create isn't going to be a true Victorian piece, more so loosely inspired by Victorian cabinets and other furniture. And the whole aesthetic comes from the vibe of the tattoo shop that I frequent here in Oklahoma City called Keepsake, where each tattoo artist has their own piece of vintage Victorian style furniture, and this serves as their storage cabinet slash workstation. And the place where this cabinet will live in my home is going to feature some of my tattoo flash art and other oddities, sort of similar to that wing it wall in the shop that you always see behind me in my videos, but also much more clean and thought out. Diving into the design details themselves, the cabinet is going to feature a central storage compartment, which includes the tambour door component of this build. But the one thing I really struggled with were the legs, and here's a couple examples of the designs that I was playing with, but even as I glued up those leg blanks, I still didn't have that locked down. Initially, I thought about using a lathe to turn a set of legs for this cabinet, but since I don't currently have a lathe in the shop, it just didn't make sense logistically to go out and try to borrow one. But with my current CNC setup, I came up with this faceted leg design that would have required me to carve all 4 faces of the legs one at a time. And this matches my initial design of the pattern tambour doors that I'm going to be making in the next step. These first 2 panels that I'm carving on the CNC are the top and bottom panels of the cabinet, with the track cut in for the tambour doors to ride in, as well as dados for that center storage area of this piece. And I've got all those panels for the tambour doors cut to the final height. One of the benefits of having this new Grizzly sliding table saw is that it's really great for cutting these tambour strips. And if you watch my other tambour cabinet build, you recall I had to cut those strips to 3/4 of an inch because I was limited on the length of the slab that I made those doors from. So cutting thicker strips meant fewer cuts, meaning less material was wasted, allowing me to get the length that I needed for that build. But on this cabinet, I have longer panels than I need, so I can cut thinner strips. And those thinner strips are gonna give more detail and hold the pattern better as the tambour doors are pulled around the corner of the cabinet. And when they pull around the corner, it sort of separates the strips and kind of breaks up the design of the doors, but in a way that's really interesting to the eye. You'll see what I mean here in a bit, but real quick, I want to talk about how I came up with that faceted design of the doors. I would say that I'm a low-level novice when it comes to my 3D modeling skill set. I mean, I think I'm getting better all the time as I put in the reps, but there's still a lot of ideas I have that my current CAD knowledge, I'm not able to translate into an actual model. And I tell you this because I had a much more intricate design in my head, but this is what I was ultimately able to come up with. And essentially 3D modeling is just taking a flat sketch and then extruding or rotating or lofting that sketch into a 3D body, which then you can manipulate in various ways. So for this design, I drew this faceted profile, extruded that into this body, which by itself is not very interesting. But then rotate that body 90 degrees and you get sort of this inverse pyramid faceted shape. Pretty cool, but I'm not quite done. So I'll give all those sharp edges a fillet, aka a round over, and then to complete the look, I'll add this button in the center of each facet. I think this looks pretty cool, but not near as good as some of the other stuff that I've seen out there. So after building that first Tambour record cabinet, there were some things that I wanted to change, and the first being the width of the strips. Now on that project, I was limited in the amount of material that I had, so I had to make those 3/4 inches thick, but it's not as dramatic as a reveal when it goes around the corner. So this time, I've made those strips just a hair over 1/4 inch thick. And I think as that pattern kind of comes around the edge of the cabinet, it's going to be a lot more dramatic looking and should be really, really cool. And the second thing I wanted to change was I always use a canvas drop cloth as the backer because that's what I read works. And it does, it works really well. The problem is the wood glue that you use to attach the strips to the backer material, it kind of leaks through and shows, and it doesn't look great. And then the edges, they fray a lot. So what I've done is I've gone out and I've got a couple yards of this black felt. And one, it's gonna look a lot better. And then also being felt, when I cut it and trim it to size, the ends shouldn't fray and get all stringy, which is a big problem with Tambour. So that's my idea. That's what I'm gonna do. Wish me luck. Thankfully, I saved that Tambour door jig from the last Tambour cabinet build, and I know this jig is nice and square and ready to go. With this wedge, I'm able to compress the strips together and prepare them to glue on the felt backer. And after trying the felt, I'm never going back to using canvas for Tambour doors. I mean, this worked way better than I imagined, and again, just looks so much better than drop cloth canvas. Not to mention, it doesn't get all stringy like the canvas. Also, I remembered I had this roller glue bottle and very quickly remembered why I never use it. So I just resorted to the much quicker method of dumping on a bunch of glue and using a plastic spreader to move it all around. Okay, one thing you have to be careful of when making Tambour doors is all that glue I spread on the back getting down in between the wood strips and those becoming permanently bonded to one another. So I let the Tambour sit for an hour, which is long enough to let the glue tack up, but not long enough to dry to a permanent bond. Then I can take the doors out of the mold and separate each strip, and once I know nothing is sticking together, I roll the doors up, set them aside, and allow the glue to dry fully. Which, as I'm carving these Tambour panels on the CNC right now, that glue's had a chance to dry overnight. When I program these carves, I do it in two separate operations using two separate cutting tools. For the first cut path you're watching now, it's called the roughing pass, and I'm using a 1/4 inch thick end mill. Now this removes the bulk of the material. Then I swap the bit out for a 1/4 inch round nose bit to do the finishing passes, which leads to all the final detail, and this took roughly 3 hours to carve a single door. So earlier I glued up those leg blanks thinking I was going to go with that faceted leg, but like you already knew, now with that design change, I need to add extra material. So I had to mill up another slab, cut those into 6-inch wide strips, cut those down to 15 inches in length, flatten everything on the joiner and planer, and then glue these up into blocks thick enough to match those initial leg blanks, which I'll set aside to dry while I flatten the boards down to 3/4 of an inch to make all the aprons. One of the downsides of working with full slabs versus dimensional lumber from a hardwood supplier is it's a bit more rustic. So before I can get all these carved, I need to address the knot holes and the cracks, which I'm gonna do with some Total Boat 2-to-1 high performance epoxy. Now, you guys know that Total Boat has been a years-long sponsor, and I stand by all of their products. And if you wanna check out their epoxies and finishes for yourself, make sure to click that link that I've got down in the description, which is automatically gonna apply a discount to everything you order at TotalBoat.com. And of course, anytime you support my sponsors, it helps support this channel. And as always, I appreciate that. And by now, it's becoming clear that this is not a true Victorian piece, likely far from it, and I think that's okay. I mean, I dig Victorian furniture, but only in the right context. And like I mentioned, that context and inspiration came from the furniture used in my local tattoo shop here in Oklahoma City. And as evidenced by the ever-increasing number of tattoos on my body since I retired, I've really come to appreciate American traditional tattoo flash art. Now, a lot of art feels inaccessible to me. I mean, if I want to see the Mona Lisa in person, I need to get on a plane, fly to Paris, and go to the Louvre. And while that would be awesome, I can't see that happening anytime soon. Whereas American traditional tattoo art is far more tangible, like literally tangible. I mean, I see it in the mirror every single day, which reminds me of a funny story. So after I got my right hand tattooed with the rose and the 8-pointed stars on my knuckles, later that evening, I was loading the dishwasher, and as I put a plate into the lower rack, I kind of jumped because I literally thought there were spiders on my hands. And this has since happened a few more times, which my wife loves to remind me of, and we both have a good chuckle about it. But all of that to say, I've really come to appreciate traditional tattoo flash art and wanted to incorporate that into this piece and make that sort of the main focus. So for this reason, I think that's why this piece gets further and further away from being an actual Victorian piece of furniture as I add those different design elements. And this wasn't always the case. I mean, I remember thinking Ed Hardy shirts were worse than wearing an affliction tee, and to be honest, they probably were. But now I know that Ed Hardy was a huge part of the American traditional tattoo scene in the 80s and 90s out of California, and working alongside Ed Hardy in that same shop is my favorite tattoo artist of all time, Dan Higgs. And Higgs really pushed the limits of traditional tattoo art into some really weird directions, and I love weird. And while I can happily claim to be a weirdo, I would never claim to be a perfectionist, and personally, I'm glad I'm not a perfectionist because it really is okay to make mistakes. What I prioritize is progress over perfection and trying to get better with every build, trying to add new skills to my arsenal, and just trying to never stop learning. But all that said, I could probably use a little bit more perfectionism in my life, and I think this build became a true test of the balance between trying to get better versus trying to get it perfect. And I won't lie here, sometimes I let the deadline dictate the level of perfection, or more accurately, when I'm satisfied enough to hit publish on a video and show off one of my projects. I mean, it's not hard to edit a video to make something look better than what it actually is and hide those mistakes. But I don't want to do that. I mess up all the time, and I'm often not truly happy with the finished build and will quickly point out every single hidden flaw to anyone that I'm showing the piece to. But with this build, I couldn't do that. Now, I had a deadline, and then I pushed that deadline back a week, and then that deadline got pushed back a second week, and then that deadline was a hard deadline because if I didn't finish in time, our family vacation we had planned was gonna get in the way and add 2 more weeks to the build. So here I am, right up against that deadline, faced with the choice, just slap this thing together, get creative with the edit, and drop a video based on my deadline, and I got right up to that drop dead day and made the decision. I'm gonna put everything into this build, even if that meant losing the sponsor, because the most important thing that I can do is make the best possible version of the piece that I'm working on while being 100% honest and open with y'all about my struggles. And I'm happy to say, the sponsor stuck with me through all the delays, and it really is a great product that costs nothing to use. So make sure you check it out because when you support my sponsors, it helps keep the lights on here at Johnny Builds. So as you've seen already, this project has presented a ton of challenges, and one of the biggest challenges was taking that initial idea in my head and then translating that to a model so I could start to build. And being such a complicated build inspired by Victorian furniture, of which I have no experience building, it was sort of difficult at first to organize my ideas and inspiration. And honestly, organization has never been a strong suit of mine, so that's why I was really excited to discover Milanote. Milanote is the sponsor of this video, and as soon as I tried out the Milanote app, I got really excited knowing how helpful Milanote was going to be on this project. Now, Milanote is an app designed for organizing creative projects, and the best part is it's available for free. Milanote is an intuitive workspace that allows you to sort of drag and drop project elements into a central hub. So for example, I started my main project board for this cabinet by dropping my initial 3D renderings onto that board. Now I can drag in text boxes to explain each picture, draw lines and arrows between related elements, and then I can create a project materials checklist and so much more. And Milanote is great for collaboration. So as I started to build out my mood board and bring in photos and inspiration for this project, I was able to share that with my wife Katie and sort of get her thoughts. And Milanote works great on the go with the app available on your phone, a tablet, or your PC. Organizing my ideas and then bringing those ideas to life has never been easier than using Milanote. And you can try out Milanote for yourself for free just by clicking on that link down in my description. A huge thank you to Milanote for sponsoring this video, and it was so helpful that I can see Milanote being part of my workflow for all my projects moving forward. So I've got all the aprons and the legs off the CNC, and I'm really digging how these came out. But now seeing these, I just can't stop thinking about the Tambour doors that I made and how they really don't work with the overall design. So I've got those first 2 panels that I carved. I mean, they look good. They don't look great. And honestly, good isn't good enough. As much as it pains me, I'm gonna go back to the drawing board and completely redesign these doors. It's frustrating. I mean, I hate wasting materials, especially materials this nice that I've spent so much time working on. But like I said, good just isn't good enough on this piece. Now, I'm gonna save those old doors and I'll find a use for them on some other project, but I really wanna challenge myself to build the coolest thing that I've ever made, and it's really important to get it right. And as I've mentioned, I went into this build with a half-baked idea, which meant I didn't fully visualize all those traditional tattoo carved inlays on the aprons and legs. So now that I've got those designed and made, I can make a proper set of Tambour doors that plays well with the overall theme. So I drew up something very similar to the wavy design of the last cabinet that I built, but here's where things get interesting. So I use a program called Vetric Aspire to create all the G-code for my CNC, which G-code is just a set of numerical directions, sort of telling the CNC machine exactly where to go. But with Vectric Aspire, it's got a lot of really good built-in 3D modeling features, including a whole library of 3D clip art. So I went into that library, I found this skull clip art, and I added that to that wavy door model. And as I place the skulls and size them appropriately, I can blend those into the wavy door. With this particular design, I can carve all the doors at once. I also designed these doors so I could use my 1/2" end mill and my 1/2" ball nose bit to do all the carving, which went a lot faster than those original carves. The only issues that I had was a few pieces were breaking off that I needed to repair. And now I can set the Tambour doors aside because I'm finally done with those, and there's no way I'm gonna have to make these a third time, right? Well, if it isn't obvious, this is what we in the biz call foreshadowing, as I totally remade the doors a third time. But I'll explain why here in a bit. For now, I'm working on the interior shelving of this piece, featuring a middle shelf with grooves cut out for the vertical dividers. And I forgot to switch to using a flat bottom blade, but thankfully I have this Cat's Moses router plane, which allows me to even out all the dados before assembly. Now, I keep talking about how this is one of the more difficult pieces that I built, and a lot of that had to do with the joinery and how I was gonna allow for wood movement. And I have to modify these side aprons to make this all work, and that's what you're seeing me do here. But first I wanna explain my original plan so you can better understand the plan that I went with. Now, wood expands and contracts along the grain, and it's going to be the most prominent along the front to back width of the bottom and top panels of this cabinet. So I need to allow those panels to move while also providing enough support to make this piece strong enough for whatever is thrown at it. My original idea was to make the front legs, the front apron, and the side aprons all glued together as one solid assembly. And then these would attach to the top and bottom panels and move along with them. Then I need to attach the back legs to the top and bottom panel, but then allow those to move independently of the front leg apron assembly. And here's a real quick diagram that I hope explains it a little bit better than I can. And I came up with the idea of adding these tabs with tenons on the side aprons that slot into mortises on those back legs. And as those top and bottom panels expand and contract, the back legs can move freely of the front assembly. And the whole time, I knew this would be every bit as clunky as it sounds, but I just couldn't come up with a better solution. So one of the best ways to improve your woodworking skills is to just ask someone that's a better woodworker than you. So I called my buddy John Malecki, and he solved my dilemma in about 10 seconds. So my idea would have worked, but there would have been visible gaps between the side aprons and the back legs as it expanded and contracted. So Malecki told me to build it similar to breadboard ends on a table, which I've never actually done, but I do understand the concept. So that's why I needed to add that extra length to the side aprons so I could carve in a tenon that slots into a mortise on the back of the legs. That tenon is then pinned in place with a wooden peg slotting into an elongated hole in the tenon, allowing the whole cabinet to expand and contract, but also never having a gap in the leg apron connection. And again, here's a little diagram if all that didn't make sense. Now this needs to be a very precise operation, so I'm breaking out this tool that I don't use very often, but I definitely should use it more. This is the Shaper Origin, which is basically a handheld router with built-in autocorrect, or maybe better described as a handheld CNC, but either way it allows me to make extremely accurate mortise and tenons. And then I can play around with the tolerance to get a perfect fit by taking off a tiny bit more material until it slots in perfectly like so. Whoa! After getting my drill press dialed in and ready to drill perfectly straight 90-degree holes, I'll drill in a 1/4 inch hole that extends all the way through that mortise. Next, I can insert the side apron with that step tenon and then drill that matching hole into the smaller tenon. That hole then gets elongated by drilling a second hole alongside it. Now, wood typically expands in warmer weather and contracts in colder weather, so building this piece in the middle of the summer, I'm giving the top and bottom panels a chance to contract and pull away from the back legs. Now, to make the pegs that will hold these two pieces together, I'm going to use a 1/4 inch hardwood oak dowel, and giving them a slight round over on the end that gets inserted helps those dowel pegs seat easily without cracking. And before I can attach the apron to the leg, I need to cut a groove along the back for Z-clips that connect the top and bottom panels to the aprons, but also allow them to move, which you'll see better in the final assembly. Back to the pegs and the mortise and tenon joinery of the aprons. You don't want to glue the pegs all the way through the hole I drilled earlier, as this would just defeat the whole purpose of allowing the aprons to move independently of the back legs. So I'll hammer that peg into the leg and through that elongated hole in the apron, and then I add some glue to the last 1/4 inch of the peg, bang it in the rest of the way. So now that peg is glued to the leg, but as you see here, the apron can slide freely back and forth. Before I start assembly, I do have one more design change to make to this cabinet. Originally, I had an upper apron that ran along the top front-facing portion of the cabinet, and the tambour was going to slide in behind it. And this would mean the apron would partially cover the top of the tambour door, but when it came time to put this all together, this just didn't seem like the right move. So for the 50th time on this build, I'm going back to the drawing board to figure out a better solution. And what I came up with are these pieces that I'm calling corner aprons. I'm not actually sure what they're called, but that's the name that I came up with on the fly, and that's what I call them for the rest of the build. So these are officially corner aprons. And these are going to connect to the legs, both front and back, as well as connect to the upper and lower panels, providing even more strength and stability for the overall cabinet, while fitting the aesthetic much better than that top apron. Okay, once I get these carved, I'll give everything a round over, and I know you've already seen some of these pieces with the round over in earlier steps, but that's just because I'm jumping around a little bit in the timeline to make that whole build process make a little bit more sense to you, the viewer. And here I'm feeling pretty good. I mean, I've got all the pieces made, I've got the joinery figured out. All I've got to do is get the whole cabinet assembled and finished. And I'm thinking with 2 days to go before we leave for our family vacation, that's a done deal. But I've already spoiled how that ends, so you already know that's not the case. But regardless, right here I'm thinking I just have to kind of slap everything together, and this was by no means an easy glue up, as you'll see. But one of the benefits of all the setbacks that I'm experiencing is it did give me some extra time to work through all those assembly steps. So while it wasn't an easy glue up, it really wasn't that stressful. And real quick, I want to say that if you've made it this far into the video and you've enjoyed it and want to see more, the best thing that you can do to support what I do is simply hit the subscribe button so you don't miss my upcoming videos. And I also sell some pretty rad tees if that's your thing. But again, the absolute best way to support what I do is simple and free and takes 2 clicks of a mouse. As always, thanks to everyone who has done so thus far. I say it in every video, but it's still, truly doesn't come close to how grateful I am to all of you. And if you truly want to be part of the JB fam, and if you watch this far into the video, comment this. And in 2 weeks, I'll pick my favorite comment and send you a Johnny Builds t-shirt of your choice for free. For the door pulls, I don't have anything figured out yet, but with the way this cabinet gets further and further away from true Victorian furniture and becomes sort of a love letter to tattoo art, I thought the perfect door pull would be a pair of brass knuckles. And if I'm being honest, my biggest complaint with the last Tambour cabinet is that the pulls weren't big enough to really get a hold of them and open it. So this is definitely a bolder version of the door pulls, but one that I think fits the cabinet perfectly and is going to be even more functional. But I'm curious what you guys think. What other designs I should have considered? And if you've got something, just let me know down in the comments. So there are a few minor details to attack before finishing this cabinet, and even though I don't use plywood anywhere on this cabinet yet, the back panel is going to be plywood. Because of the way I joined the internal cabinet panels together, I wanted to hide those dados, so I'm going to be adding some walnut edge banding. And I was going to laser engrave these with some other cool details similar to the aprons. But I do think it's important to know when to stop versus when taking the design too far. It's about balance, which I definitely struggle with. Okay, the doors are done and the handles are attached, meaning all I need to do now is install them. And by this time, you may have noticed that I incorporated an entry point to slide the doors in after assembly. So real quick, I want to go ahead and make those plugs to fill the entry slots after the doors are in. And again, this is the perfect job for the Shaper Origin, where I can dial in that fit until it's perfect. But after further thought, what isn't perfect are the doors, and I had to make another gut-wrenching decision. I'm essentially done. All I've got to do is a little bit of sanding, put finish on the cabinet. I've got these doors all sanded, put finish on these, put it all together, boom, release a video, go on vacation, right? Spoiler, I just got back from vacation. Because right before I left, I was looking at this, ready to put it all together, and I'm like, it's not good enough. Because of that original design, I had these doors a little bit thinner than what I would actually like. They finished closer to 3/4 of an inch. And on that other Tambour cabinet that I built with the wavy door design, those were 1.5 inches thick, so twice the thickness, and it looks really good. And I'm just not getting the same effect on these. For the third time, I am going to remake these doors. I'll save these 2 doors, but I just don't want to put them on this piece. I think Johnny from a few years ago would have just been happy with these doors and ready just to get this project over with, but I feel like I have to get this right. Again, not perfect, but the best I can possibly create. And the last set of doors, I mean, they look cool, but it's still not good enough. And I feel like in order to top that last wavy Tambour cabinet, this has to be better in every single way. So I could throw out all my little sayings like trust the process, put in the reps, wing it, whatever. But what it really boils down to is, are you willing to take the time to put in the extra hours, to do the hard thing, to end up with something that you're proud of? And in the end, I think I got there. But like always, I'll let you be the judge. I did, however, manage to destroy my workbench with epoxy because I didn't think to put a few silicone mats down before, but that's a problem for future Johnny. And in the meantime, I can finish the cabinet assembly. Now, I have to add in all the Z-clips and install the corner apron things. And while I'm waiting for the epoxy to cure before I can make the new doors, I may as well go ahead and add a finish. And I'm going with this Total Boat Wood Honey, which I'll throw a link for you down below. It's probably the best bang for your buck in finishes. And then the following day, that epoxy is all cured, and I can finally start working on the 3rd set of Tambour doors and get this project done when the unthinkable happened. I can't believe this is happening again. What you say? Not that one. Not that one either. Hello, darkness, my friend. There it is. So one thing that happens when wood is kiln dried, it can do what's called honeycombing, where you get little pockets inside the wood because the wood sometimes dries too fast. And that's what's going on with this wood right here. I thought I was able to impregnate all of that with epoxy, but as you can see, it didn't get all down in there. There was some that the epoxy just couldn't get to. So what it does is it makes all of these strips useless, meaning for the 4th time, I have to make these doors all over again. This time, I'm just gonna go to the hardwood supplier, get some dimensional kiln-dried walnut, the thing that I didn't want to use for this project, but I just don't have any choice. I've got 2 days to finish this project, so I just don't have time to work with another slab, impregnate it with epoxy, or even go through and fix every one of these, which would take a long time. We're just gonna do a quick montage, getting the wood, milling it up, gluing it up, turning it into Tambour. Now let's carve these bad boys. So the new version is essentially the same as the first version, except the waves are now taller, deeper, and more pronounced. So really no point in making you watch a ton of footage here. And the doors are finally done. Or so I thought. What can I say at this point? Everything was great, right up until the very last thing I had to do, which was carve the little ledge that rides in the track. The pieces moved up on me, meaning it carved too deep, which meant that it completely carved away a lot of those and ruined these doors. I have to make them for a 5th time. I'm rambling because I really don't know what to say because I've never ever had my ass kicked as much as I have on this project. Just after taking the weekend, just to think about it, I've got a plan. What I'm gonna do this time is I'm gonna cut that ledge in before I cut these up into Tambour. I'm gonna put a little bit of a round over so there's a little bit more material attaching it to the actual strips. Pattern came out perfect. It looks really, really good, exactly what I wanted. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to offer to build this cabinet. If someone wants this cabinet in their home or something very similar, I can use these doors again. I'll just have to cut a new ledge on them. If you're interested in purchasing this cabinet, I've got a link for you down below. With that said, I'm not gonna make you watch me glue up and mill and build these doors all over. Okay, the new Tambour doors are all put together. They look good. Time to go carve them on the CNC. And the doors are finally done, and they look really, really good. Like worth all the trouble of all the designing and redesigning, and then redesigning my redesigns that took to get to this point. So I present to you what I truly believe is the coolest and by far the most difficult project that I've ever made. I never told you what this is going to be used for in our home. What that 5 weeks of blood, sweat, tears, splinters, long days, sleepless nights, more splinters, and all the bullshit that came with making this piece is for. Well, my wife asked me to build a simple shoe bench for our new house, and I said, Katie, hold my beer. Whew, I have never been so happy to be done with the project, Andy.
You know you can get a shoe bench at Target for like $50.